Welcome, everybody, to Live from My Drum Room, and please welcome my good friend and the great Aaron Comis,
Hey
my
man,
man.
what's up, John?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And happy belated birthday to you, too. I just wish Jim Keltner happy birthday. It's today.
Yes,
Yours
happy
was,
birthday, Jim.
yeah, happy birthday, Jim. Happy birthday, Aaron.
Thank you. I just
Okay,
got back from a couple days down in Miami, so that was nice to get out of town for a bit.
that's great, man. How was the weather? Must have been great down there, I'm
It was
guessing.
perfect. It was absolutely perfect. It was great. Yeah.
Do you have a place there, or do you have friends that you go hang with, or is there
Yeah,
like
I
a,
just I just stayed at a hotel down there. I like to go. It's such an easy, quick getaway from New York. A couple hours
yeah.
flight, 3, 4 days down there. And it's a night. I like to go once every year or two if I can. So it had been a while since I'd really done much of anything, or at least like hung out at a beach. I mean, I travel all the time for gigs, but you know how it is. It's like
Sure.
you
Yeah.
might get a free day, but it's not the same. So it was really nice just to get a couple days there just to relax.
That's great, man. Yeah, you got to do that. Disconnect. I'm looking forward to doing that when the time is right. Exactly. Just
Well, I'm glad to hear you're feeling a little better.
thanks, buddy. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
And you, man, we could probably spend the whole show talking about you. You've had it twice. I didn't realize that. I remember when you had it the first time, I guess.
Yeah, I got it. I got it like it was, right after I got double vaccinated. It was like last summer when things started to open up, and I was touring a lot, and I got the Delta somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
And I felt pretty shitty for about 10 days. And then I was actually scheduled to get my booster. Oh, no, yeah, no, that's when I got Delta. I was scheduled to get my booster that Monday, and I tested positive that morning.
Oh man.
Then I got it again. I think I got it, when pretty much the whole world got Omicron, around the holidays.
Yeah.
I had like that same cold that everybody had.
Yeah.
And I tested negative a couple times on the home tests, but I'm pretty sure it was Omicron because I know a lot of people, were testing negative, but it's like everybody said I have a cold, and it's like, well, you got COVID.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But
You
anyway,
know,
that was no big deal.
yeah. Well, that's interesting because I got a cold, same thing, right? I got it, started feeling it Christmas Day, and I did a home test, tested negative, did a couple home tests, tested negative. Frustrating. Made a PCR test, and at that time it took a week to
Yeah.
schedule the test, and I think I was able to get it either New Year's Day or something like that. Like it took a whole week to finally get the PCR test. I took it, and then it took 3 days to get the result. So it had been like 10 days, and it came back negative.
This was this latest
Th-
holidays?
yeah, this
Yeah.
latest holiday. Yeah, so same kind of thing, and it came back negative, and I'm like, man, it has to be it. But I don't know, Aaron. It's a weird, but I think I was sicker then than I am now
Yeah,
with that.
who knows? I mean, you probably had it then too. I mean, who
Yeah,
knows?
who
But
knows?
I'm glad, the good news is neither of us got too sick, and we're
Yeah,
here. And
that's right.
it's been a crazy, crazy thing. And I've been really, really as good as I can, with masks. And I'm on a lot of planes, and I'm in a lot of gigs. I'm around people a lot, and I'm very careful. But it's like
Yeah,
it's that one time you're hanging out, and what are you gonna do?
I
Life goes
know.
on.
Yeah,
You
and
gotta
and
go.
I think I agree, and I think in this case it seems like these variants now are like they're less severe, but they're more contagious. So it's
Yeah,
almost like you know, everybody's probably going to get this in some variation at some point. I mean, it seems that way. My,
yeah.
my wife hasn't gotten it though, which is crazy because I was definitely infectious for a couple of days before I really started to take precautions. So I don't know.
My mom got it a couple times. She was sort of a long hauler, and my dad, who's practiced medicine for 50 years, a doctor, he didn't get it. He's in the house with her. So I think there's
Oh,
some people just can't get it.
yeah,
Like some
yeah.
lucky people out there. Anyway,
Good. Okay. Yeah, we won't
you know,
take the whole time talking about that. I have to read you. So lots of people watching, and Brad Arnold. I don't know if you know Brad. Brad lives in Texas. And he said, my dad used to work with Aaron's high school jazz director, Bart Morantz.
yeah.
So,
Oh,
so he,
great.
and,
Bart
and
Moran, Bart was a big, big part of my, education growing up. I was very lucky to go to a incredible high school in Dallas, Texas, called the Arts Magnet High School. and
Yeah.
Bart Morantz was the director of the jazz groups there. So I did, small group and big band, and Bart was great. It was an incredible school.
That's great, man.
Yeah,
And so so I wanted to ask, so you grew up in Dallas.
I did.
You did
Yep.
grew up in Dallas, and that was like I'm guessing you took formal lessons as well, studied.
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky because at the time, the music education in the schools was really, really good. So
Yeah.
from like junior high on, I mean, I was playing in big band in seventh grade at my public high school. And actually I went to private school before that, and I was in, concert band playing snare drum. And then I went on, I did a year of drumline at Hillcrest High School. Great drumline. It was me, Brian Keeling, who great drummer.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Hugh Elliott, who was like the senior, who was like we all like idolized Hugh, and Trini Martinez, and another great drummer from Dallas named Gerald Irigori, one of my best friends, played the concert toms. But this was a great drum line, so that was an incredible experience. Also had a stage band there, and then I went on to Arts Magnet for 10th, 11th, and 12th, which was really just incredible because. I was actually there at the same time as Roy Hargrove, so we were playing together every single day,
Wow,
and
man.
just a ton of incredible musicians, most of whom I'm still friends with to this day. Still play music with a lot when I go home. There's a lot of people up here now from there, and the biggest thing that happened to me was when I first started playing drums. Was I was 9 years old, and I told my mom and dad I was like, I want to take drum lessons, and just by luck, they called up the local Brook Mays music store, which was in our neighborhood, and they, signed me up for 30-minute drum lessons once a week with this guy named Jack Iden. And Jack Iden was just incredible. He, for the first 2 years, he wouldn't let me get a drum set. He made me play practice pad, then I got a snare drum, and I'd get my mom to come in there with me and like, Mom, just tell him I want a drum set, And he would just be like, look, you may hate me now, but you'll love me later. And it was really just an incredible thing to, he taught me how to play, traditional grip. I do that 100% because of Jack Iden. I remember
Wow,
my
yeah.
first
Yep.
lesson, my first lesson, he's like, hold this like a hammer. I remember he said that. And then when he went to show me this, it was just like, what is this? It felt so bizarre, but I stuck with it, and it's great. But he was incredible. And then I also, when I finally started playing drum set, I was again really fortunate to have great teachers. I studied with Rick Latham for a couple years.
Sure, yeah.
Rick got me into, chart reading. And then when Rick moved to LA, he hooked me up with his former teacher, Henry Oxtell, who was the head drum teacher up in North Texas. He's taught, tons of guys that, we all know, like, I think Keith Carlock studied with him. He might have studied with Ed Sof, actually. But Matt Chamberlain studied with him. Greg Bissonette studied with him. A lot of guys who went through North Texas. And he was incredible. And I studied with him all through high school before I went on to, move. I went to Berklee and then New York. But yeah, so Dallas was an incredible place to grow up for
Yeah,
music.
great scene there. I know, and still is a great scene there.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
and again, you got North Texas. You got all these guys. I mean, think of all the drummers. You could,
yeah,
it's a long list of incredible drummers that came from North Texas and also just Dallas. I mean,
yeah.
so growing up, before I moved to New York, and well, I went to Berkeley for 1 year after high school. Then I moved back to Dallas for a year and just played gigs, and then moved to New York. But like, I mean, I'm hanging out with guys like Matt Chamberlain. We're setting up drums in my living room, playing together, and Earl Harvin, Brian Keeling, Gerald Irigori, Alan Emmerich. And I'm hearing and I was looking up to the guys that were older than me, like Dan Wojciechowski and Rick Latham, and
Yeah.
I mean, the list goes on and on. It was crazy.
That's great. Yeah.
Keith Carlock was a couple years younger than me, and but I mean, man, it's pretty wild.
And great company, and it's so cool to see so many of those other drummers you mentioned like go on to do great things like you did. And yeah, it says a lot for the whole vibe there, for the environment.
Well, there was a
And
lot of
nurturing it.
there's a lot of support between us all, but there was also a lot of healthy competition because it's like one of the reasons I wanted to move to New York was to just be around the greatest musicians in the world and learn and kick my own ass to raise my own bar. And but Dallas kind of had that already. So like growing up, I already sort of had a certain amount of that inspiration, trying to sort of you know stay on a level.
Yeah, yeah,
It was pretty cool, and I think that's part of the reason why you see so many great drummers came out of there is because they're any place where there's a lot of talent, it just it moves around and
yeah. And
contagious.
like you say, and it like you say, it forces everybody to up their game when you got, not that you guys were. I mean, I think drummers are great in that when they compete, it's a friendly sort of competition, so to speak. You share it. If you can't make a gig, you offer it to somebody to sub it for you and that kind of thing. But it's still, you're competing for gigs with other great drummers, so it forces you to be on your
Yeah,
game. Yeah,
hundred
absolutely.
percent.
So who were some of the guys you were like digging at that time, like high school years? That would have been like the sort of late '70s, mid late '70s.
80s. I grew.
Oh, right, you were born at
Yeah.
you're at '80s, mid '80s. Yeah.
I graduated high school in '86.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was like, I was into, I mean, when I was younger, I was all about rock, like, I mean, I loved Kiss, when I was a little kid. But then I quickly got into like, Zeppelin and The Who, Black Sabbath, AC/DC, Van Halen, the Stones, the Beatles. I mean, I have an older brother who also is a musician, and so like a lot of the stuff I was listening to, I learned from him.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
great because he was turning me on to all this great music. So it started with like all those guys, all those great rock bands. So it was like, Rush of course too. But I remember vividly, like, my parents had this great music. We used to call it the music room at our house. They turned the garage into a nice room because our house was sort of like Grand Central Station. My friends used to call it the Jam Palace because we would always have jams over there on the weekends and after school, and we had instruments and drums, and so I had this great room to practice in, and I remember playing along to like, Zeppelin all the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
all that stuff. And then as I got a little older, I started to, discover some jazz stuff like, Return to Forever, and Mahavishnu Orchestra,
Yeah.
then Miles Davis, and then it led to like Miles and John Coltrane and Charlie Parker, and so got more and more into jazz as I got into the high school years, but always loved rock. So I'm kind of like the same as I've always been. I've always been somebody that's just really genuinely loved a lot of different styles of music, and I've always really wanted to be able to play them. So from an early age, I worked really hard at trying to be really versatile, and I sort of emulated myself equally from guys like, rock drummers like John Bonham and Stuart Copeland, and really Charlie Watts, really recognizable guys in bands
Mm.
I love. But also, I was equally into guys like Steve Gadd,
Yeah.
Jim
Yeah.
Keltner and Vinnie Colaiuta and the studio guys. And then I discovered jazz and became equally into Tony Williams and Roy Haynes and Elvin Jones and that thing. So, you know, I've just always loved all that and still do. And, just tried to work really hard when I was younger to play. I really just because I wanted to play all those types of music. So, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do when I moved to New York. I kind of wanted to be a guy in a band, a jazz drummer, and a studio drummer. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's worked out well. No, because I mean, anybody that listens to your playing can hear like a definitely like a schooled jazz influence, and and not in a mechanical way, but like a really, like you definitely you can hear that you have technique in your playing, but there's definitely like a rock feel to it, which is great because that's a hard thing I think for a jazz drummer to really play authentically in a sort of really authentic rock feel.
well, I
I
appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank you for saying that. I mean, I've always thought it was important I've always tried to study the different styles in an authentic way and try to sound authentic. I think it's important, to really like listen to, as a musician, if you're trying to really be an accomplished musician, to study all these different musicians and styles of music and try to learn them as authentically as possible. And then obviously you want to turn it into your own thing and become yourself and mix and match however you choose to, which ultimately gives you your own voice, hopefully. But I think like it bothers me when I hear guys like playing rock and roll and it sounds like maybe a fusion drummer playing rock. That really, or you go
Yeah.
to a blues gig and there's a bunch of sort of jazz guys playing blues. It just that kind of stuff just bugs me. It's like and I grew up in Texas, so I understand like blues.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's something that I sort of that's one of those realizations I made when I was young and have tried to not do that. And it's like I think you got to have a really open mind, but you also have to sort of decide, figure out what it is that you don't like. You don't have to advertise it and be an asshole, but like figure that
Yeah.
out and then put it into your own playing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes perfect sense. And what you just said makes perfect sense and explains why you are the way you are because you've paid attention to that stuff and you've really like you said you own it. You've made it a point to be authentic when you play. Like the first time I heard you play, obviously with the Spin Doctors, and I think it was probably 91 or 92, and it was just like you just burst on the scene, man. You were like this fresh sound that was not happening at that time. It was like a rock and roll Steve Jordan kind of vibe. You know what I mean? And as I got to know you, I realized that was what your background was, and it all made sense at that point that you weren't like a garage drummer in a band that I mean, you definitely had some background, some schooling, and you could play the way you play as a result of that. But you were still, it sounded fresh, and it sounded like you were part of the band. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, man. I mean, like I said, as far as like particularly in a band situation, I mean, my personal favorite bands are those bands that have a real personality and where all the musicians have a personality. The band is recognizable. My favorite drummers are, like John Bonham. I mean, you don't need to hear more than a few beats, it's him. Same
yeah,
thing with Stuart Copeland, Charlie Watts, Ringo, Levon Helm. I mean, all my favorite guys are guys like that where it's like instantly recognizable.
yeah,
But it's
yeah,
not something you can just sort of like do on purpose either or try. I think you don't want to try too hard to be like you just have to, it's just an organic thing. So I mean, I think I was lucky to also have a situation early in my life, where being in a band like that where I could sort of create my own voice and didn't really have people saying you got to do this, you got to do that, or you got to play what that guy played on the record, or it
yeah.
was an opportunity to just create something unique. So I'm real grateful for that.
Absolutely. And so I was going to ask you now, when so the band formed in the late '80s,
Yep.
basically, right? The what became the Spin Doctors formed in the late '80s. Had you already kind of settled on a sound? Had you already or developed, I should say, developed your sound, like the snare drum sound and that.
I mean, not really. I mean, like I moved up here. So basically, I graduated high school in '86. I went to Berklee for 1 year, and that was like the year that I, practiced 10 hours a day, and played at night. It was a great year. I
Yeah.
made a lot of growth that year, And then I wanted to just move back to Texas, Dallas, and just gig. I got my own, house with a bunch of friends, and pretty much played every gig under the sun. Also practiced a lot. And then I was like, okay, I studied with Henry Oxtel again that year. And then I was like, all right, I got to move to New York.
Mm.
It was either New York or LA, and I gravitated towards New York. A lot of my favorite musicians lived here. So I went to the New School for a while. They just started a really great music program there a few years earlier that actually Roy Hargrove told me about. We were doing a gig in Denton one day, and he handed me this pamphlet because I had told him I wanted to move to New York. So about and as soon as I got to town, I'm jamming with people. I'm going back in those days. You would look in the back of the Village Voice. And they'd have drummer wanted. I was going to
Yeah.
jam sessions, auditioning, doing all this stuff, and so I was practicing one day at the New School, and I got a knock on the door, and it was Eric Shankman, the guitar player.
Yeah.
Eric. and he just heard me, and he said, "Hey man, I'm putting a band together. Do you want to play? You want to be in the band?" And typical drummer answer, "Okay, sure, I'll check it out." That's how I got in the band. He was just forming the band. Chris was also going to the school,
Wow.
but I think at that point, like you know, I don't know that the sound was developed. I think it was starting to develop. I was definitely coming from like kind of like what you said before. I was a guy that, you know, practiced a lot. So I had a lot of technique, but I was also very, very aware of like I always wanted to be a drummer that had a really good, strong groove and pocket. And so I would practice, just as much as I would practice the technical stuff, I would practice just grooving. Like, one of the things I did when I practiced at Berklee that year is I would put on a metronome and just play a straight beat for like 2 hours straight with nothing, not deviating at all, no fills, no nothing, just straight, just like meditating the pocket, and that was a really great thing to really help me. So by the time I got to New York, I was very aware of like being a groove drummer, playing for the song. I was studying with Bernard Purdy. I just started with Bernard,
Wow.
started studying with Purdy. So all around this time, it was like I was studying with Purdy. I just got in the Spin Doctors, so we're just starting going, playing, writing songs and starting to play gigs. So I really think in that first year was when that sort of started to happen, and
Yeah.
I think my sound style sort of developed a lot then, and then go a couple years later, the band things are really happening for us in New York. We get a record deal. We have some money to get some new equipment. So I wanted to get a new kit. And I had been playing my Yamaha recording series GAD kit that I bought in high school, which I actually, oddly enough, that's the kit I'm using now on tour. It's,
No kidding. Oh man.
I've been using it again the last couple of years, and it's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But anyway, when we got that money to get some equipment, I was sort of searching for a new sound, and I went up to Manny's Music, and I was kind of thinking maybe I'll get like a Sonar kit or I don't know. I just wanted something a little different, And they had just gotten these kits from Australia, Brady, and I just loved them. And so I got a Brady kit, and I got a couple snare drums, those snares that are on that record, and that was sort of a defining moment, I think, because there were those drums. I mean, obviously, you got to make the sound of a drum, but those drums had a unique sound to them, and
Yeah.
I was tuning my snare up tight. I wanted sort of that. I was sort of coming out of somewhere between. I always liked the way Stuart Copeland's snare sounded, and I was getting real tired of the big, deep, heavy gated reverb '80s sound that was so big, and I didn't want to do that, And our band
Yeah.
really didn't. We were, it was like the '90s. All of us were more into like either classic rock, or like R&B, soul, or like some of the new bands like Jane's Addiction or Living Color, and a lot of that stuff that was so popular in the late '80s, the heavy metal. Nothing against it, but it just wasn't our scene at all. So that's sort of how I think I came with that sound. And one last funny story that I love to tell about the Brady snare sound is that when we were recording, Two Princes was one of the first things we recorded when we got our record deal. We originally we were just going to put out an EP, and so we went into the power station and we were going to cut like 5 songs. And we had 2 producers, Frank Aversa, who was like the engineer producer, and then Frankie LaRocca, who's the guy that signed us. You know Frankie probably, right?
I do, and I want to. We'll talk about him later because I was going to mention Frankie.
Yeah, he's anyway, great guy, great drummer. He sadly passed away about 10 years ago. But anyway, so we're in the studio and we're getting ready to record Two Princes. Power station, the A room, probably my favorite sounding room in the world. It just sounds phenomenal. And I have my Brady. I pull out my Brady piccolo. I'm all ready. I got my sound together. And the producers are really pushing for me to play like a big, deep fucking Ludwig drum. They want it like, no, this is what's on the radio now, big, big, deep reverb. It's like, well, I'm thinking, well, we're not, no offense, but we're not Bon Jovi or any of these bands, we're trying to do our own thing here.
Yeah.
And luckily, all the guys in the band had my back, and we really stood our ground on this one. And, and this is the difference between like being a band and being like a session guy. Because
Yeah.
I do a lot of session work, and if the producer or the artist want me to play a big, deep drum, or they have I'm happy to do it.
Hmm.
No problem. And but for this situation, this was like sort of part of the sound of the band, and we really stuck to our ground. And this fight lasted like half the day.
No
And,
kidding.
and this is also back in the days where people would spend like a day on a snare sound.
Yeah.
Still that thing. We're like, it's like, that was just the way it was back then. Bloated budgets and just overkill. And so finally, we got our way, and it's a good thing because I don't know how Two Princes would sound with a big deep drum.
I'm going to just throw it out there, and Eric's guitar playing is great. Chris's vocal is great. The whole tune is great, but your snare drum, to me, that's that song, man. That's that. The intro, the sound of that drum. Good for you, man. Good for the whole band, really standing your ground like that and backing you up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where there's a lot of sort of like there's certain. It all starts with a great song and a great arrangement and great playing and all that, but like the stars have to align, I think, for something like that to happen. And like this, you're right. Like besides it being a really, really great song, the sound of that track is really a big part of it. The tempo, we slowed the tempo down. The original, there's a demo out that's like, the song was a lot faster. We pulled the tempo back, sonically, all the instruments and the snare drum, it was the snare drum, as we know, it can be such a big part of the character of a track when you're recording it. It's such a huge, sort of besides the vocals, like you said, the snare drum is often like it's a huge
it's a
part
voice. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
again, it's I'm grateful that it worked out, on that song.
Yeah, me too. I never knew that story. By the way, I have to tell you that your teacher, Rick Latham, is watching, and he says hello.
Ah,
And
Rick.
big hello to Rick Latham, the legendary Rick Latham.
Listen, Rick was so key in we were just talking about him before, in my early development. I got to teach with him. Take lessons from him. I think I was like 7th and 8th grade. In fact, he had just put out, I got to go through his book, but right before it came out, Advanced Funk Studies.
Yeah.
And he was the first guy that hipped me to like, pocket and groove and also chart reading, which really like, chart reading, learning how to set up the big band and the hits. I've taken a lot of that into my playing, to this day, playing with just playing songs, learning how to set up the different sections. And so that was a really valuable lesson. And Rick was great. I was lucky to get to study with him.
Yeah, a great teacher and a great drummer. Yeah,
Great drummer.
absolutely. Yeah, that's cool. Well, so back to the Spin Doctors record though, because this is great, and this is some, I think, really good information for people to hear too. That because when you're kind of a new band like that, you tend to be at the mercy of the producer or the engineer, and if they say if they really push it hard, a lot of bands sometimes do have to sort of acquiesce and change the snare drum or change an arrangement or change something. But with Frankie LaRocca there, I would think that he must have been a pretty supportive guy as another drummer, and recognizing you being a great drummer, that had to, I'm guessing that helped a lot too.
Frankie was always super supportive. Throughout, those years when we were with Epic and working with Frankie as our A&R guy and also co-producer, I love Frankie. But he was also coming from a different school because he played on a lot of records in the 80s,
Yeah.
He played on like the first Bon Jovi single, Runaway. That's
Yeah,
Frankie
yep.
LaRocca, and Scandal and
Goodbye to You.
so he was the guy that was like, we got to have big drum sounds, and but ultimately, he had my back and he supported me because he had been in my shoes. That was what was so great with working with Frankie as an A&R guy, is that like he wasn't your typical business guy because he was a musician. He had been out there, So, but it was funny because like the sound of the drums on that record, they are pretty big. There's a lot of air in them. There's a lot of room, but the drums themselves are kind of tuned a little tighter.
Yeah.
And I love where we ended up. But at the time, if I would have had it my way, it would have been dead. Like the drums would have been dead. And if Frankie would have had it his way, it would have been huge. So it was always this battle. Like I remember we'd be tracking or mixing. And, Frankie would go over to the board and he'd take the room mics and he'd go up there. And then when he wasn't looking, I'd go and I'd go, and Peter Dannenberg, who ended up mixing the whole record, and he also produced the rest of the other half of the record. He would hate us. He's like, guys, you got to stop this. You're fucking up the whole mix. But what was great was where we ended up in between was just perfection. And I love the drum sound to this day. The drums sound, they still sound really fresh and organic. They don't sound dated at all to me. And it was just one of those cool things.
Yeah,
Frank,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, just Frankie, man, he was the best.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think I haven't met him in person, but we spoke on the phone a bunch of times because I think when I started at Zildjian, he was still kind of actively playing in the late '80s.
Yeah.
In a band, Company of Wolves or something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and he was, he was a character. He was kind of like, it was funny because I don't know. God rest his soul. I used to feel like he was sort of working me. You know what I mean? Like it's like, hey man, I've got this thing going on, and da 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 da, and
Yeah,
if
he
you
was that kind of a guy. I mean,
yeah,
he was a hustler, and he always had his shades on, and
but a
you know,
good dude. Yeah, really
great guy.
sweet guy. And then I remember when he got on the other side of it, and he was signing bands, and I don't know that he was the connection to you. He might have been, um, but I remember there were other bands that he would call on their behalf and say,
Yeah.
can you work out a deal? Can we buy some cymbals for this band? They're just, I just signed him, and he was the kind of guy you'd always want to help him out because you felt like his heart's in the right place. He's going to really do his best to try to get this band working and going, and
Definitely.
minimal risk type of thing with him, and but that's yeah, Frankie.
But going back to what you were saying, like about new bands. I mean, and us sticking our ground on that record. I think, it's really important. I think for bands and artists to just do their own thing because,
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen so many, great bands or talented artists sort of crash and burn by trying to do what was popular at the moment or doing what the record company thought was going to sell. I mean, I've just seen it happen so many times. And the truth is, like, people want to hear something fresh. They don't want to hear what's maybe popular right now. So it's like nobody can predict that. So in the end of the day, just do what you do. And that was
Yeah.
always what we did. We really didn't pay any attention to the trends at all. And so I think because of that, it was like a little bit of a fresh sound. It wasn't any super innovative, groundbreaking thing, but it was just like there was a freshness to it that was unique.
Absolutely. No, I would 100% agree on that. It was, and I think you did break a lot of some new ground too. But I mean the sound, and it's interesting because in my recollection, Aaron, your snare drum sound, even, it was a Brady snare drum, like you said, it had been around for a while. People had been using it, but because you were using it on a pop record, a hit record, a couple of hit records between Little Miss Can't Be Wrong and Two Princes and the record itself, which was huge. Like you kind of catapulted to this place as a drum hero, and then you had this unique sound as totally different from anybody at that time that was out there.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. No, man, to your credit, you had a vision, you had an idea of what you were trying to do, and you could have just gone, okay, man, I'll go with a deep Ludwig, and I'll, and a emperor head, and I'll put my, muffle it really flat, and get that gate it or whatever. But you stuck to your ground, you got that sound, and that became a sound like a lot of people then wanted to emulate. So.
Well, that's
Yeah.
that's cool. I appreciate you saying that, and
Good on you.
it's always nice to hear that. But yeah, I think ultimately, whatever it is you do, whether you're an artist or part of a band or just a sideman. I mean, ultimately, it's important to have your own voice. I mean, there's so many great. Just talking about drummers, there's so many great drummers out there. And as always, there's always a lot of people that sound a lot alike. People always sort of gravitate. Who's popular now? What's the popular sound? And it's easy to sort of just try to emulate that and become that. And believe me, emulating is great. I mean, we all get our voice by copying people. I mean, I copy. I could when I'm playing a gig or a session. I mean, I'm 20 different drummers are going through my head at once usually. But hopefully the idea is you get what you like. You don't do what you don't like, and it comes out sounding like yourself. But ultimately, whether it's a band or you're an individual drummer for hire, I mean, you'll do better by having your own sound because of I mean, you think about like just the guys that I named before. I mean, Gad, Levon Helm, Steve
Yeah.
Jordan, Jim Keltner. I mean, these guys all sound so unique, and so I'd always just encourage people, stick to your guns, do your own thing, and know when the time is right because it's not always as a sideman, it's not the right time to like insist that you play a certain. You might say, well, this is what I think would work, but you got to be ready to go the other direction on a dime, and be cool about it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to your own group, that's a different story.
That's great advice. I want to just read you quickly what my friend Gary Marshall in the UK said. You're also responsible for my empty wallet by buying Brady drums. So I think you are. I think you
Oh
did
well,
definitely sell some Brady drums in those days.
that's cool. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
hey man, it's good, money well spent, right?
That's right. Exactly. So not to put you on the spot, but if I remember correctly at that time, like when you recorded that record and before we connected with you coming over to Zildjian, did you use some Istanbul cymbals, like the original on that record, or mix?
Actually, on the record, I was using pasty cymbals.
Okay, Pice, that's right. Okay.
I don't know if I've ever even said that out loud.
No, but I think you told me early on that you had.
Probably did, yeah.
Yeah, you did. Because
I
you're an
did.
honest guy.
Well,
Why not? Yeah.
hey, they're great. 'Cause that was
Yeah.
when we got that money, when I went and bought that Brady kit, I bought a set of pasty cymbals as well. And that's what's on that record. And then, I'd always played Zildjian growing up. It's funny. I think it was just I had this desire to get something different. When we got that cash, I was like, I want to get a different kind of drum set, a different kind of cymbals. But I got to mention the Zildjian thing because I'll never forget like how I got the day that I became a Zildjian endorser, and I know it was both you and Lenny DiMuzio who approached me. And I remember I was visiting my parents in Dallas. It was like, Christmas break or something. And, the band was taking a few weeks off. This was like, probably the record must have been out. This was probably like maybe 1992 or something. I think
Yeah.
the record was just starting to get some traction.
Right, right.
And I was just hanging out in my room at home and the phone rang. My own line. I don't know how you got my number. Kids line, and it was Lenny. It's like, hey, hello, this is Lenny DiMuzio, and I'm like, I knew of Lenny was kind of like a god to me because
Oh,
when
yeah.
I was in high school, I used to go a lot to the PASIC conventions. I'd travel around, me and like Brian Keeling and Gerald Irigori. We would go. They would let us out of school at this arts high school we went to. It was great. They would actually let us not go to school and go travel to these PASIC conventions for 3 or 4 days. So I went to a lot of them. And one of them was actually in Dallas. The year Steve Gadd was there, it was in Dallas. But I remember always seeing like, Lenny DiMuzio, with his Zildjian jacket on. I was like,
Yeah.
So when he called me, it's like, hey, Aaron, this is Lenny DiMuzio, we'd like to endorse. I mean, it was just like a dream come true. And then shortly after that, I met you, or I think you might have called me shortly after that. And you were always my guy up there. I mean, and we, you were so great. I mean, I remember like, just hanging a lot, and you always coming to the shows and bringing big bags of swag for the whole crew. Everybody loved you. I mean,
Well,
you're one of a kind, man. You're like, I mean, there's not
thanks,
many
brother.
John DeChristopher's out there. Everybody agrees. So
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks, brother. I
yeah.
appreciate that. I remember coming to see you in those early gigs, like you say, in the early 90s. And one of the times, I think it was the second, or like you guys had already been well established, and this would have been maybe 93 or 94. I brought Debbie Zildjian's two daughters, one of whom, Katie, now, works for the company, and she's like one of the key figures at Zildjian. But I remember they were like big fans, and Debbie came to me. I don't think they were teenagers yet. And Debbie said, could you bring them to Great Woods to see this? That's their favorite band, the Spin Doctors. And so I brought them with me, and I brought them backstage to you, and you were like, the whole band met them, you met them, and really nice to them. And So you definitely, I got a lot of brownie points out of that one particular
Good, good.
hang with the family. But no, and I just want to say likewise, you were always just such a pleasure to work with, so humble. And I remember us hanging at, I want to say it was a Tony Williams clinic at the Collective.
Yeah. Oh no, you know what it was?
Was
I
it
don't think it was Tony.
Simon maybe?
No, it was Treelock.
Treelock. Okay, that's right. Treelock. Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. I remember we really got to hang at that. I remember you
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
and so glad to see you there and yeah and all through the years, man, and just to
Definitely.
see, and the great thing is you've done other things too, like of note, like playing with Joan Osborne kind of during some of those gaps between the Spin Doctors too, and
Yeah.
like going on to kind of broadening, not broadening your horizons, but kind of having that versatility of playing with other musicians and
Yeah, and it's important, I mean, like I said earlier, when I first moved to New York, I pretty much equally wanted to be like a guy in a band, a jazz drummer, and a studio guy. And obviously, the first decade was really primarily focused on the Spin Doctors, although I always did a lot of other gigs. But like, I guess kind of around 99, when the band sort of slowed down for a bit, I really started to focus on, working with other people. And And so, 30 years later, it's sort of like I've got the best of all those worlds now, which is great, and have done, a lot of records. And I have my own group, which is on the jazz side of thing. I wouldn't call it straight ahead jazz, but it's, I've made 4 studio records of my own band and play pretty regularly around town with that. So, it's just, I just truly enjoy doing all those. And I feel like, the more I do these other things, it all helps each other. Like,
yeah,
working as a side guy, it helps when I come back to the band, and being a guy in a band, it sort of helps when I go into a sideman situation, sort of, because they're all similar. It's like when you get in a studio to make a record, maybe it's with a bunch of guys that you've worked with a lot, or maybe it's a combination of people, but I think I always felt like, the main part, half the job besides playing really well is creating a good vibe, being easy to
yeah,
work with, being easy to be around, and sort of making it feel like a band, you know what I mean? Because whenever you're in there and it feels like we're all in this together, working together as a team, the music always sounds better. It only takes one guy, to sort of bring a session down real quick,
yeah, yeah.
and so there's a lot of psychology involved in like recording, and being in a band is the opposite, where unfortunately, people can get away with murder in a band, because
Yeah,
so it's interesting. So I feel lucky that I've been able to do all that, and I try to sort of bring those roles into the different things I do, and it's helpful for me, and hopefully it helps to sort of hopefully I can bring something to these different situations as well.
that's great. And I'm guessing too that when you do these other projects, when you come back to the Spin Doctors, there's like a sort of renewed kind of vibe there too, where not that it would be stale otherwise, but I'm guessing it's kind of like it's that absence from it, and you've been playing with these guys, and now you've got this sort of fresh approach to then apply to your kind of your regular gig, which
Yeah,
Spin Doctors on.
absolutely.
Yeah,
That's definitely true. And I think after all these years, I've you know doing all these different things, it makes me appreciate the band even more,
yeah,
because
yeah,
the best situation is being the artist. It's like not having to sort of wait for the phone to ring, or just having a little more control of your situation. So I really appreciate being part of this band after all these years, and which is one of the reasons why I'm still doing it. It's like,
yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of other gigs I've had to say no to. It's hard sometimes to have to turn down some cool opportunities, but ultimately, it's like, it's I really enjoy it, and I love the guys. The band sounds great. If we were like sort of, if we weren't firing on all cylinders, I wouldn't do it. It's got to be like, it's
Yeah.
got to be top. And I feel like, honestly, I feel like we're playing as good or better than ever right now. So I appreciate it, and I think everybody else does too.
That's great, man. What a great outlook to have, And I want to read a couple quick things. Paul Georgia said, "Aaron brought rudiments to the alternative rock scene. Thank you." Well said. I was sort of trying to get to that, and that's
Yeah,
exactly right. Yeah, yeah, you did.
five
Yeah,
stroke roll. I
exactly,
can
man.
thank Jack Iden for that, my first teacher. I mean,
So I want to, and talking of just for everybody's, because people sometimes afterward I do these things like I wish you asked more about the drums. So the Brady kit that you used for that record, do you remember what the sizes were?
Yeah.
The
So
time is it?
the kick drum was 22. I don't remember how deep it was, but they were pretty deep. You know, a little
Yeah, yeah,
deeper than standard. And all the toms were deep. They were like that's back when everybody was using deep toms,
yeah, yeah,
which is one of the reasons I stopped using that particular kit because I just got tired of the deep toms. I couldn't really set them up the way I wanted to. You know, I like my toms lower.
yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that that was 10, 12, maybe 15, 16. I think I may have it wrong. But I know that I had like two toms and two floor toms.
Yeah.
You can
Okay.
hear it on Two Princes. Like there's that fill at the end,
Yes.
all the way.
Yeah.
It's like those eighth notes all the way around the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know now I've been using a four piece for over 20 years now. You know,
Right.
and I use 13, 16, 22. But that was the setup on that, and then the snare drum was I used the piccolo Brady on Two Princes, and I used the standard 5.5 by 14 Jara snare drum on pretty much the rest of the record, with the exception of the final two songs, which is Shimbonali Hard to Exist, was a 12 inch, like a 12 by 5, I think,
Oh
Brady,
yeah. Yeah.
and that was it. That's the setup.
Cool. And
You know,
and you
basic
and you
cymbals.
and you still have all those. Sorry, and feisty cymbals. Yeah. And you still have all those drums.
I do. They're
Yeah.
actually in storage. That kit's in storage right now.
Great.
But it's there. And I have another Brady kit that I got like years later, which is a little more standard sizes. But I've been with Yamaha for like 15 years now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I didn't have an endorsement for all that time back there. You know, I was with Zildjian and Remo and different stick companies. I've been with Vic Firth for a long time now. I was with Zildjian sticks for a while back when
That's
we were,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
but I always just wanted to play whatever I wanted to play. You know, I didn't want to be locked into a drum kit. But then it was like, you know, over the last 15 years in particular, most of what I do is fly dates. You know what I mean? So, and I was just using Yamaha on my rider. So finally I hooked up with your buddy Joe Testa back when he
Yeah.
was still there, and you know Joe's amazing. Now he's obviously with Vic and Zildjian. I love Joe, and but I've stuck with them, and I just got their new. They just came out with a new recording series kit, which I love.
Great.
But I'm actually using my old original, like I was saying, my old 1984 black recording series
Man.
on the road, and it just sounds phenomenal. And it's great because I feel like I'm back in my practice room in high school. You know, it's like there's this comfort zone of seeing like the kit that you sort of grew up playing and playing it out there on the road now. You know, pretty cool.
Yeah. That's very cool. It's like you're playing technically vintage drums too, which is pretty cool. You know, and they're. But and you have some. I know because you and I have geeked out over our vintage collections. You got some like '60s Yamaha drums too, right?
I do.
Vintage
I have a
you
couple. I
record
have a
with?
couple sets of those late. I mean, yeah, like 1968 Yamahas that are great. I have like a jazz sizes and then a rock size. I got a couple great Gretsch kits. I got some 1950s, jazz sizes. They look a lot like the ones you have there to your left. And then I also have beautiful orange sparkle Gretsch kit, which I got up at Maxwell's a few years ago, which was phenomenal. I got some old 50s Slingerlands. I got a lot of drums, too many drums.
I didn't know you had that many kits. I knew you had a few, but man, yeah, you've
I
been
do.
bitten by the bug too. So
I got a lot. And unfortunately, because I moved out of my studio recently where they all were, so a lot of my stuff is in storage right now. I have a smaller room where I'm at, so I'm kind of in limbo. And it's kind of, I got all this incredible gear. I want a big room again where I can have it all sitting there, you know.
I hear you. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I'm lucky. I want to read a couple more comments before they slip by me. And this was from Richard Reed a while back. He said, Aaron, thank you for letting me play your kit when I was out with Sophie B. Hawkins. You are awesome, brother.
Oh, hey, man, I remember you. Cool. Yeah, that guy's
Yeah.
great.
Richard Reed, great guy,
Richie.
great drummer.
Hey, Richie.
And Ralph Angelillo, the Montreal Drum Fest
Yes.
organizer, promoter, producer. Yep. Remember how great you were at the Drum Fest, especially with our local funk singer, Marie Christine.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks for having me that time.
I
We
remember
hung
that
out.
too.
We got to hang out there. I remember.
I remember that. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
I think it was my first year as a civilian going there.
Yeah, or maybe you were either that or you were about to be. I think
Maybe I
you
was about to be. Okay, yeah.
were about to be.
But I remember you were there that year and killed it. And Mike Chilton is asking about a practice routine. Maybe you could share with everybody.
Well,
All right, look at that.
Steve Gadd. You know, I usually do a little bit like in the morning when I'm making my coffee. I got my little setup over there. But let's see. I love doing like. Here, let me put a metronome on here.
All right.
Let's see. So the thing, you know what I like to do a lot is those it's kind of like the Gadd thing, actually. I think he does that. You know, the paradiddles, we displace the every 16th note.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's a good one. You know, I do all kinds of stuff. I mean, or just like, you know, three. Those are great. Same thing with displacing. You know, I use the syncopation book a lot. If anybody,
Yeah.
I'm sure if anybody's not familiar with that, there's like a few pages in the middle that are just incredible. And there's like a million ways to do it, you know, just on the pad as well. But you know, I try to do a little warm up before I play. I mean, sometimes I won't, sometimes I will. It's obviously very helpful. But I try to do a certain amount of pad practice every day. I go through periods. I like to practice. I'm somebody that tries to practice pretty regularly. Just depending on my schedule, you know, like during the pandemic, I probably practiced more than I had since I was at Berklee, you know.
Yeah.
And I just got into a routine. I've been busy again now, so there's not as much time, but I try to get over to my drum room as much as I can. And I tend to do like when I was younger, I'd practice like 8, 10 hours a day, crazy. I can't do that now, you know, but I like to do like an hour of like really dedicated, focused practice. Like go in there and just really focus on what I'm doing for like an hour and get out. I find that's what sort of helps me the most, you know.
So
And I
when,
try.
let me when you go in for an hour of like real concentrated focus, you have like what kind of because I would love to know this for my own kind of use. Like what
Yeah.
are you working on? Like what do you go in there kind of zoned in on?
A lot of times I'll go in there. Sometimes I'll just be working on technique stuff. This is sort of like sharpening the pencil type of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, it's usually drum set related because I usually do like pad stuff here at home, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I almost always use the syncopation book when I'm practicing. I do a lot of four-way independent stuff. So, you know, a lot of times I'll start with that kind of a thing. And there's just, you know, a lot of different types of exercises. A lot of them are with the swing pattern, you know, and doing different things with the other three limbs. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that I like to get into. And then a lot of times it'll be, I might spend some time working on like some new groove concepts, sort of coming up with some things, working on some different sticking patterns. And then sometimes I'll just sort of, you know, improvise and let loose a little bit. But I try to be pretty focused. I don't like to go in there and just sort of, you know, just play for an hour. I like to really sort of divide it up into, and I still work out of a lot of books a lot. There's a great book that I love by Pete Macadini called, well, I think it used to be called, what is it? Polysymbol Time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
He changed the name of it. But, and I went through that years ago with Henry Oxtell, like back in high school. And a couple years ago, during the pandemic, I started going back through it again. And I actually had some contact with Pete. He was such a nice guy. And we talked about it. And it's really, really pretty advanced polyrhythmic four-way independent stuff. So I do a lot of that stuff as well. And you know, a lot of it's stuff that I don't, sometimes I use it and sometimes I don't, but it's like, I tend to, you know, really know the difference between practicing and playing, you know, so it doesn't matter how much I'm practicing. It's not like I'm going to get on a gig and be like, okay, I got to throw this in now. You know, it's really more just for the comfort zone. But I find that by doing all this stuff that, you're just more flexible when you get in a situation, and particularly with like a band like my own, which is the more jazz oriented stuff, where I have an opportunity to sort of do a lot of stuff like that. It really comes in handy, and
Yeah.
and even just playing just grooves, it's interesting how working on sort of complex four-way independent stuff can help just the simplest beat feeling more relaxed when you're just doing a simple beat. So, but I'm definitely somebody that tries to practice as much as I can to this day, and I find that it's really helpful for me.
That's great. That's very inspiring. Do you find, Aaron, that when you mentioned like you try to warm up before you play, but sometimes you don't, do you see a difference maybe in the first couple of tunes and maybe how you feel, maybe not how you play so much, but how you feel either mentally or physically when you don't warm up versus when you do
You
warm up?
know, it's yes and no. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of the best thing that can happen when you get on stage is that you're relaxed. You know what I mean? That's, I
Yeah.
think, the most important thing, and that's not always easy to do because sometimes the adrenaline can get you. But it's interesting. I've really learned over the years to just trust myself and know that, like, I think we've probably all been in situations where you were super relaxed and just felt like you had the best gig ever, and then maybe you heard it and it was like, it wasn't anything special. And then other nights when you maybe felt, oh, I was stressed out, I was frustrated, and you heard it and it was like, wow, that was great. So it's like I've kind of learned that sometimes that nervous energy or that frustration can actually translate to a really great performer. And so, I think a lot of it's mental. It's sort of
Yeah.
trusting. I've been doing this for a long time now. I'm not going to go up there and mess up. You know what I mean? I can handle it. So it's like, but I enjoy it more. The more relaxed you are up there, the more you're going to enjoy it. So I think sometimes if I play a little bit before, it sort of just helps me, you know, be a little more relaxed. My body's a little more relaxed. Like the other day, I did a gig. I was on a bill. It was a festival, and both Spin Doctors and Joan Osborne were on the gig, so I got to do both gigs.
Oh, cool.
And Joan, it was a bunch of bands. Spin Doctors played. We had a great set, and then Joan played. So by the time Joan played, I was super warmed up.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome.
So it
Yeah.
was like so that's an example of like we all know like when you play a gig, by the middle of the gig or by the end of the gig, you always feel great. You're always having a great time. It's always sort of getting through those first three or four songs. I think for any performer, getting through that first part of the show where the adrenaline's kicking in, and sort of just trusting it. You got it, and then you start to relax and really have a good time. So I think anything that helps you get there is great. Whether it's just any routine you have before you play, sometimes just hanging out with the people you're playing with and making some jokes, or
Yeah.
maybe you want to go off by yourself for a minute, or maybe it's just warming up on your knee for 10 minutes. Whatever it is important.
That's great. I'm going to use that advice personally because I find that it is like you say it's mental a lot of times for me, where if I don't have time to warm up even for a little bit, those first couple of tunes I feel like I'm struggling. I know most of the time it's mental. I know it's in my head because
Yeah.
I'm physically able to play these songs. They're not hard songs to play, but it's just I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm pushing it, or I'm dragging, or it's not grooving at all. It feels like shit. And then sometimes I will hear a recording. Somebody will post a recording of a song, and I'll go, actually, it wasn't bad, and but
Yeah. You got to
I don't
just
know.
trust it. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. There's a certain amount of, professionalism that's there, and you trust it. And, but, it's interesting because, it's all about, most importantly, you got to do your job and sound great, but
Yeah,
you want to have fun and be relaxed, and that's going to help you sound that much better too. So it's
yeah.
interesting, I could talk all day about that stuff. It's an interesting sort of circle.
Yeah, no, I could too. I know. And
And
and,
it's
and a lot
different,
of our
and
friends.
it's different when you're in the studio as opposed to being live. It's a whole different, mentality and how you feel and where your state of mind is to get to that place. It's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was going to say too, and a lot of our mutual friends are. It's interesting how when you start talking about it with other drummers, how many of us share the same kind of philosophy about that. It's that whole thing kind of what gets in your head and what you can't let get in your head, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, for drummers, it's really important you got to have a certain amount of confidence to play the drums. I mean, because we're the glue. We hold it all together. And as soon as you lose that confidence, the ship's going to sink, And drummers, I've seen a lot of drummers that happen because let's face it, whether it's your fault or not, if there's something wrong with the tempo one night or, you're going to get blamed for it. It doesn't matter who counted off the song.
Yeah, exactly.
Guitar player can count off the song, but if it was too slow, it's still your fault.
Yeah.
So, and so you gotta, and I don't get any of that with the band because, they don't really care if it's fast or slow. It's like, it is what it is. But like, other people I've worked with, that can happen, or maybe from one night to the other, they might want a tempo a little bit different. And so you have to really not let that bother you. If somebody says something to you, just okay. Even if it's not right, you just okay.
Yeah.
But you can go down real quick. And the worst thing for a drummer to lose is their confidence in their timekeeping.
Yeah.
Because then you're screwed. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Well, you know what? I got to just say, we'll end this on a I think a funny note. Great example of what you just said, Aaron. Last week, I had to cancel. I couldn't do my gig because of my COVID situation.
Yeah.
And so my band did it as a trio without me. They chose to just do it, which they do many gigs as a trio, kind of in these other venues that are just like more acoustic. So they chose to do the gig just as the three guys. And Neil Porter, our singer, said, sent me a text the other day, and he said, "We're going to miss you tonight. It won't be the same without you, but we're still going to blame you for our timing."
That's there you go.
Yeah, I just cried. It's exactly what I needed at that time because I was pretty bummed out. But
yeah, I love it. That is so classic, man.
Yeah,
That's so classic.
they're probably counting the tune off, going like, it's his fault, damn it,
Right?
But anyway,
That's great. I love
but
it.
but I have to tell you too. I spoke with our friend Charlie Drayton the other day, who says he was so excited that you were going to do this today. I don't think he's able to watch it, but anyway, he said you guys just did a record together or played on the same record together, I should
Right.
say.
Yeah. Charlie. Well, Charlie's great. Yeah, we just did a record. Really great artist named Danelia Cotton, singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
We both did some. I did like half the record, and he did half the record. And yeah, Charlie's amazing. Honor to be on anything with him. That's one of the coolest things about like being in New York. You find yourself on records with guys like Charlie Drayton or Gadd or Steve Jordan. I mean, it's amazing. And these guys, I grew up, being inspired by, I mean, Charlie, and Jordan and those guys, like Charlie. I mean, like that stuff he did with B-52s, like that's him on like Love Shack and right.
Yeah.
Like so that's a real big influence. Like those tracks. When I think about sort of like when I was getting my sound together for the Spin Doctors, because that record Love Shack was out a couple years before, like right when we were forming.
That's right. Yeah.
I remember that snare sound, man, that backbeat, and that really caught my attention. Same thing with Jordan, like with Keith Richards,
Yep.
And I think I think they were playing Brady drums too.
I think so. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Yep.
That like those are two real great examples of like right when I was sort of getting my sound together, two guys, specific recordings that were direct influence on me in sort of preparing for that recording, But yeah, hey Charlie.
That's great, man. That's great. Two great role models right there, man. I mean,
oh yeah,
hard to beat that. But Aaron, thank you so much for doing this today. This has been such a pleasure to have you here today. I'm glad we were able to fit this in.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've been really enjoying the show. I've seen a lot of the episodes, and doing that Charlie Watts tribute was a real honor. I mean, I'm sitting here, all of a sudden there's Vinny and there's Keltner. It's like, oh man. So thanks for allowing me to be on the same screen with those legends.
Absolutely, man. It was a pleasure to have you, and you belonged with those legends because you're one yourself. And thank you for being part of that because you shared some great Charlie stories as well. So
yeah,
awesome.
Well, great to see you, man, and
Thanks, buddy.
keep up the great work. Congrats on the whole Modern Drummer Association too.
Thank you.
It's definitely one of the best. I guess this is a webcast, not a podcast, right?
It will be it's a podcast too. Yeah, it'll be
cool.
both. Yeah.
All right, take care, everybody. Thanks, man.
Big hand for Aaron Comas, everybody. Thanks for watching. Live from my drum room, Modern Drummer Podcast, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.